Hey guys, welcome to the I Hope to Hear This podcast, and we have returning guest, Miss Jessica Wang. Hello.
Hello.
Today's episode is actually I'm really glad it's happening because Jessica actually reached out after listening to the episode with Junhui regarding kind of the conversation around COVID-19. But I think um, the relevant piece of conversation that I think we're going to focus on today is kind of everything around the Ahmaud Arbery case.
Mhm.
Kind of the implied racism, and even with like as an Asian American, like how do we respond to it and all that kind of stuff. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, Jessica, if you did you kind of want to take it away? Do you want to talk about like what
Sure.
prompted you to want to talk about this topic? Yeah.
Yeah. When I was listening to your conversation with Junie, yeah, I just was really glad that you guys are having that conversation first off. And then it also in like your description, how you wrote like, this was pre finding out all the news on Ahmaud Arbery's death or murder. And so I just was like, wow, like that's it's really crazy because I just feel like it was the unfolding of, you know, what our voice as Asian Americans, where do we stand like in all of it? And yeah, so that's the reason why I reached out. It just made me think a lot about my personal work that I've done as an educator, because I have, or I was in a residency program that focused a lot on equity in education. And a lot of that work like starts with yourself, and understanding your own personal biases and understanding, maybe even your own identity, which is something that I am still in the process of, like understanding the Asian American identity and voice. So yeah.
So you mentioned you are an educator, but I'm assuming your studies or kind of your interest in that topic is very relevant because of the demographic of students that you teach, right?
Yeah. So I went to Georgia State, and a major proponent of the education program there is for urban education and social justice education. And so the residency program that I was a part of, it's not like through Georgia State, but it's partnered with it. And so it focuses a lot on just social justice and equity in education.
Yeah. So so
Yes.
so when you first heard about, because this is the again, this is the first time I'm actually talking about the murder on the podcast, because it was
Mhm.
just good timing because when Chuni and I talked about how should Asian Americans respond to um, injustices toward other minorities, I personally had no idea that the Ahmaud Arbery case was going on. I don't
Yeah.
think Chuni knew either. But yeah, so when you first heard of it, kind of what was your first reaction as a minority to that?
Definitely just a lot of grievance towards, him and his family. Because the biggest thing that like I'm just it's disturbing because it's so close to us because we're here in Georgia, first off. And then also in the midst of a pandemic when, like humanity should really be bonding together and should be in solidarity with one another. I mean, I know that it happened in February, but it's just like another reminder that these things are still occurring and that these things are still happening. I feel like within the past, like, I don't know, even more years, but the whole rise with like Black Lives Matter movement, and once that kind of became a thing, like it was really popular and prevalent on social media. But then, like, as with all other movements and things, like eventually the novelty of it, so to speak, like
Yeah,
kind of dies down, unfortunately, right?
right.
But I thought, like, here here's another Black life that was lost. Um, and so like just being able to see so many people posting about it, I thought that was a really good thing, you know, because we're bringing light to another issue, you know, has always been there, but you know, like it's been something that I feel like as like the followers that I have on Instagram, like all of my close friends, right?
Hmm.
Or the community that's around me, like the Asian American community, like it was something that everybody was really posting. And it was really interesting
Yeah.
to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For me, when I first heard about it, I actually just saw an article on it. I hadn't seen the video yet. I saw the article and it kind of seemed, I mean, it's sad to say this, but it almost seemed routine. Like, oh, another black person got shot, right? But the thing that shook me to action to even like talk about it and like mention it to friends is the video. Because the video is
Mhm.
really like you, I don't know of any other case where there was a video of the actual murder happening, right?
Mhm.
So there was
So,
like a, yeah.
oh, no, go ahead.
No, so for me, it was just like a visceral reaction to the video that kind of shook me into action.
Yeah. I actually did not watch the video because I saw everybody else's reaction to it and I was like, I don't think I can handle watching that. Like,
Yes.
but just even the fact that like everybody was just that shaken up by it, you know, like that's enough for me to know like how tragic and that it was. And yeah, I definitely think that too though, that like because that has been a really common response
Hmm.
to the video. um so yeah.
Yeah, it- and you kind of mentioned how the people that you're following on social media, your Asian American friends, they've been posting about it and talking about it a lot. And I've seen that as well. Do you feel like it might actually be one of the first times where Asian Americans are being very vocal about it? Because I like with all the other cases in the past with like Trayvon Martin and all those other incidences, I've
Mhm.
seen a few friends like talk about it here and there, but I haven't seen this sort of unity where almost everyone I know is talking about it.
Right.
Do you get the same sense?
I do. And I've been really thinking about that these past couple of days because it's like I'm wondering why that is too. Um and maybe it's because like everybody is just on social media all the time now because of the current circumstances, like nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's because, you know, like over the course of the past few years, I feel like that the Asian American voice has become a lot stronger. And we have recognized that we do actually have space and we do actually have a voice that can be heard, you know? So yeah, I don't know why. I think that'd be really interesting to like ask each person.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I definitely noticed that too.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
wonder if it has anything to do, because this is kind of what Junie and I talked about as well, but I wonder if it has
Mhm.
anything to do with the fact that Asian Americans on a very mass scale have been facing prejudice and discrimination because of COVID-19. And
Yeah.
I wonder,
Um,
yeah, I wonder if it's a case of like we've kind of gone through a little bit of it, so now we can sympathize more, or I don't know.
well, I think maybe like
Yeah.
that's definitely a possibility.
Mhm.
But just like thinking about what you're saying right now, like we have faced obviously not the same kind of prejudice and violence, you know, that Black and Brown lives have faced. But I mean, I I really liked when Junie, I forgot what exactly, like word from word what he said, but just basically like the whole idea of like comparing suffering. You
Mhm.
know, like if we shouldn't be comparing suffering or oppression, because the thing is that like we are in a system of racial oppression, right? And if we continue to compare, you know, who's facing what and like who has it worse, so to speak, you know, like it's not it's still not getting to the root issue
Mhm.
of systemic racism.
Yeah.
um but yeah, like that, I just paused when you said that because it just made me think about like I feel like Asian people still have faced, you know, discrimination, microaggressions, even violence, you know, um, prior to COVID-19.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it definitely has been something that's been prevalent within the news, you know, as of late. But yeah.
Yeah. So then, can you talk a little bit about the residency that you were a part of, and kind of what different insights you have to the situation because you have the advantage of having gone through that education?
Yeah. So it was called Create, the Create Teacher Residency Program. Shout out to Create. They're going to listen to this. But yeah, I mean, just to put it in a couple of sentences, it was a residency program to help with teacher retention rates within urban education through um, through the lens of equity, because uh, like statistically, there's a higher what is it called, like a turnover rate of teachers in urban education settings, because there are so many like issues that are at play, um, and so the work that I did within that residency program, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, you do X, Y, and Z, you know, in the classroom. There definitely was a lot of that, but I feel like the majority of the work really centered around you as an individual, and being able to um, practice self-compassion for yourself in order to be compassionate with other people, um, and a lot of that also is interwoven into equity, because like where is your heart when you are really engaging in work with other people, with other students of different backgrounds, of different races, you know, of different beliefs and things like that. So it definitely helped me so much to finally have the language to um, the language to speak about all of these things that I have faced my whole entire life, you know. Um, and yeah, I think it's definitely shaped the way that I process and just analyze these different situations, because had I not been educated on this prior, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, can you, by using what you think your reaction would have been prior to create, can you kind of compare how you would have looked at this situation, like prior to create and post create?
Yeah. I think a really big realization for me was through the work that I've done, um, and through different like resources and things. Like I feel like a really big shift that occurred for me was my definition of racism.
Mm.
I used to think that like racism was basically when somebody was prejudiced against another person, you know, and um, another person of a different race or a background. Um, but it really has shifted to that, yes, that is racism, but it's all within the systems of power. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, because I actually wrote some notes because I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that I didn't mess this up. But that the definition of racism, yeah, it's not just when people of different races are prejudiced against each other, but it's the idea that there is one race that is superior over others, which is enforcing these systems of power and oppression towards minority groups. And so when you really think about the systems at place, right, especially in the context of the history of America, it's keeping the ones that have been in power, aka white men, still in power. And through the history of this country, right, of the colonization over Native Americans or the indigenous people, and the enslavement of African people and that were brought over here, and just like the decades of African Americans fighting for basic civil rights, human rights, like we're still in the remnants of all of that, all of the oppression that existed in the past. And it doesn't look the same way, obviously, but it still exists, and oppression still exists. So that that is like the biggest thing. And I guess that is definitely something that I wanted to bring up in this conversation, just because I feel like once you understand it at a systemic level, it then shifts things for you, because it's very easy to feel like overwhelmed and lost in like, what can I do, you know, as like a single individual. And I think prior to, you know, like my learning and my experiences, like I would oftentimes feel like that, and I would just be like, if only people would just be like more loving towards each other and just be kinder to one another, you know, and all that stuff. But and again, that is true, and that is something that is to be valid or valued, right? But but I think what is more powerful is when you're able to work to change the actual system, because then that is actually bringing a lot more action, that is giving more, I guess, opportunities or just more justice to other people. So yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's interesting that you kind of added that, or you mentioned that the way that racism is defined, how you talk about it's like systems of power, kind of viewing one race superior to another. And I was thinking about that as you were talking. I don't see blatant displays of that very much, unless it's like some crazy KKK person saying, "Oh, white people are better." But when I really think about it, I think I do see kind of nuanced and subtler versions of that. One of the ways that I can think about that is, I forget the kid's name, Brock. You know the guy who like raped the girl behind a bar and like behind a dumpster, but he got a few
Mhm.
months and a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
I forget his name, Brock something.
I don't
But
remember his name either,
yeah,
but
but
I know
anyways,
what you're talking about.
right.
Yeah.
And the judge said he should only get a few months because there's so much potential in his life, right? Like he has such a bright future. So I think he's a white guy, and that's kind of the lens that the world views him in. But when it's a black person, relatively young, I mean, very young black guy running down the street jogging,
Hmm.
his value that the world views him with isn't as high, right? So
Hmm.
it's not the blatant, the Aryan blood is superior to all else, that kind of superiority thing. But I think there is still remnants of that in the form of, this kid has potential, but this kid probably doesn't have potential. And kind of the almost
Yeah.
subconscious ways that some people might view people of
Yeah.
color. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I meant by like, it's like the remnants of that still existing, because we are still within the same exact institution and the same exact system that was established like when America was first created.
Right.
Um, and yeah, and so I feel like uh, I'm losing my train of thought.
Yeah, it's okay.
But it's just because okay, I'm going to be very honest and transparent. Like, I was really nervous to talk about this
Mm,
because it is so touchy, right? And I'm not one to be like very vocal, and like, I'm not a social justice warrior either. Like, I'm not an expert. Like, I'm going to fumble through my words. Because it's really difficult to talk about, because I'm not even white, and like, I feel uncomfortable saying like, yeah, white supremacy exists and is at play, like, I know it, but like, to actually verbalize it, like, it's uncomfortable.
yeah.
But I think the reason why I wanted to, or I did reach out, was because I just really felt like this was important.
Mm,
um yeah, especially like, um with all the work that I have done, and just me really understanding and accepting, my own identity as an Asian American. Like, it just felt right, and it just felt important to talk about this. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's also another interesting point that you bring up, because I think we do, as Asian Americans, we do tend to be kind of nervous about and very hesitant about this topic, especially because it seems like such a black and white issue, right? Like, I don't mean that it's clear cut. I mean it's like black people versus white people, and I think Asian Americans kind of feel out of place in the conversation. But
Mhm.
no, I think it's important to have. And I'm gonna be very honest and transparent too. It's I like when these things happen, I don't immediately side with the victim side. Like, with the case with Ahmaud Arbery, I actually waited a little bit to for the facts to come out before I felt comfortable kind of talking about it. But I was thinking about that the other day, because do you think that's part of the problem? Like, am I part of the problem in like not wanting to go to the side of the oppressed immediately, or is that the wise thing to do?
This is a really hard
Yeah,
question,
no, yeah.
and I'm glad that you're asking that,
Mm,
because I think that those are really important questions to ask yourself. And I don't have the answer for
yeah, yeah.
you, um, because there can be so many layers as to why you did, like, or like how you process things. Like, maybe you're more of like a logical person rather than like emotions based person, or maybe it does have to do with like your previous experiences as a minority and things like that, right?
Hmm.
But I think, um, I definitely feel the same way, that like, I feel like there is a hesitation before we as Asian American people decide to speak. I don't know if that's a cultural thing or not.
Mm,
Um, but I do hope that, we would be able to see the bigger picture, and like, coming back to that definition of racism, of like the fact that we are living in a society um, that values certain people over others, right? And so when you take that into account, it's like, it doesn't matter if he was doing something like that he wasn't supposed to be, right? Like, with the
mhm.
whole footage of him being on the vacant home or whatever, like, that does not deserve the penalty of his life being taken away.
Yeah.
if a if a white person did that, like, the worst thing that would happen is like that they would get arrested, right? But the fact that like somebody, or those people in that neighborhood were like chasing him down, like, we're watching him and chasing him down, and then that led to the consequence of him losing his life, that's absurd.
Mm,
Like that, like, I just it's so disproportionate in the ways that um, things would play out if it was a different person or a
yeah.
different race. So yeah. um, but yeah, I mean, I've definitely had friends that have, also kind of shared that same line of processing all this information. But um, yeah, I think that is a lot um, of self work to be done.
Hmm.
And, like to dig deeper with yourself in that too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so one of the ways that I went about processing this is I actually have a friend in law enforcement, and so I mean, but I felt okay to talk about this even more because it seems like a unanimous decision. Even people on the law enforcement side, they're like, yeah, those guys, they what they should have done is called the police. If they suspected that uh, Ahmaud Arbery was doing something wrong, they should have called the police instead of chasing them down with guns. And so that's
Yeah,
kind
a
of
hundred percent.
yeah, that's like a unanimous thing. But like just because of the way that I process things, I started looking into the law, like what rights do citizens have in terms of like citizens arrest laws and things like that. But like one conclusion that I came to is everybody is given the right of due process when they've committed a crime. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're innocent until proven guilty, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the burden of proof is on the state, meaning that the state needs to prove that you've committed a crime in front of a jury of your peers. So the fact that even if Ahmaud Arbery did steal a ton of stuff and I don't know, like whatever crime he might have committed, even if he did commit a crime, I mean, it doesn't look
Mm-hmm.
like he did.
Mm-hmm.
But like, let's say worst case scenario, he did commit a crime. He was robbed of his due process because of overly zealous people that
Yeah.
should have definitely called the police. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I'm beginning to realize and see more from the side of the bad people in these kind of cases, right? But I think there is something to say with the fact that like it took me this long to actually get to that place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that it took me like watching a video of a guy actually getting murdered. Like I mean the video isn't it's not like gory or bloody or anything. It's just the fact that you can clearly see like the
Mm-hmm.
struggle of him fighting for his life,
Yeah.
trying to run away and collapsing. And like like oh my gosh, that's when he like lost his life.
Yeah.
Uh, It's sad to say that that's what shook me into like wanting to learn more about this and becoming more vocal about it. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's better late than never, is kind of what I'm telling myself to comfort myself. Um, but yeah, I think I definitely am hoping that through these conversations that we're having, that Asian Americans would be more vocal about it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you, what should the response of like for you personally? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the answers, but what would you say is the appropriate response of the Asian American community to this murder?
Um, I mean, I think the first response is just to see that another life was lost, right? And to have compassion for their family. Um, like that's the very first thing that comes to my mind.
Mm,
It's not about the facts. It's not about picking a side, but like the grievance of another life that was lost.
mm,
And sadly, another data point, to the fact that like so many Black and brown lives are facing violence and are killed basically every day. Um, so I think it's just really having that compassion towards other people and realizing, like, I think like the way that you were processing it, like, um, yeah, I think that is the right response, you know, to dig deeper and to question like your own intentions and like your own thoughts and your own belief systems. Because the way that people will respond in times of crisis is all different. Um, but I think when you are responding from a place of compassion and uh, of love, you know, like that's, it can be anything, and it would be good.
Mm.
Yeah. So I mean, like everybody has different platforms, like whether you have like a bunch of followers, like thousands of followers on social media or something, or you know, or if you have the capacity to donate to the cause, or like, or just like even just talking about it with your own community and your own group of friends, you know, to be able to really unpack what happened, you know, like I think all of those things are maybe they're small steps, but maybe they're big steps too in being able to recognize the strength of your own voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Having conversations, and I think even more so than ever before, posting it on social media, I think is very helpful because I mean, I heard about the case through social media. It wasn't through the news. It was first social media, and I only saw it on the news once it kind of started blowing up on social media.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way to get a lot of awareness out there and having conversations like this, like the conversation that we're having now. I think it's really helpful to because I'm processing a lot of things while we're talking about it, like here,
Yeah,
you know.
for sure.
So I think that's really good too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I feel like the conversation of even understanding like our own identities as Asian Americans is not nearly as like it's not talked about enough in a way for us to be able to understand um, yeah, like the strength of the voice that we have. I mean, like we all obviously share things and values within our culture, right? Like going out to go eat at whatever really good Korean restaurant, you know, like those are things that we do share, but like to actually discuss like the nitty gritties of like, oh, you know, like somebody at work today said this really strange comment to me and it made me feel uncomfortable. You know, like we don't, at least I feel like those conversations aren't really had.
Mm,
Um, and so I think that is also a really big reason why maybe there's been like a delay in a delay in having um, our presence because we ourselves aren't talking about it.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like we definitely know it's there, but like the follow up of it, you know, like it's not there.
Yeah. I think that conversation is a really super important conversation to have too. And, and so, kind of along those lines, I'm gonna ask kind of a controversial question. And
Hmm.
I don't suspect that either of us will have a question or either of us will have an answer to this, but what would you say to Asian Americans that feel like they can't support the Black community because they're not being supported by the Black community? So, what I mean by that is there are, I mean, a fair bit of the incidences of racism that are happening to Asians during COVID-19. I mean, especially the really like highly like publicized and shown on media is
Hmm.
it's usually like I want to say at least half of it is perpetrated by Black people, like Black people toward Asian Americans, right? So it almost feels like we're having for some people it might feel like why would we support people who don't support us, right? So
Right.
do you have any thoughts for people kind of thinking those thoughts?
Um, Yeah, because I definitely understand what you're saying. I think I hope this doesn't sound like a cop out answer, but like I have to go back to the same definition of racism that I was using before because the effects of this system of racial oppression has existed before any of us were even born, and that influences all of these other systems too, you know, of like education, of the economic system, and like, you know, whether or not, I mean, I'm just gonna, I'm just like fumbling through my words again, but
No, it's okay.
like a lot of the times, like the people that are saying those things against Asian Americans are usually people that have not had like a higher level of education,
Mm,
so to speak, right? And you know, at the root of all of those offenses that were given, it's because they are either one, fearful, or two, ignorant, or both. um, so I think too, it's hard because it's like yes, it does feel like a personal attack because it's like against your own people, but then also like you have to see the bigger picture. You have to choose to see the bigger picture in all of it, because otherwise it's just going to perpetuate this system of racial oppression and pitting people of color against one another.
right.
um yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if that, yeah.
No, I don't think that was a cop out answer at all. I think I definitely do agree with you that the bigger picture does need to be looked at, because what we're viewing and experiencing is such a small sliver of the total history.
Hmm.
And, it's just a really complicated history between Asian Americans and Black people in America. And like, I wouldn't be comfortable saying, oh, like, you guys need to love this group first. Like Black people needs to support Asian people first before we can support them. Like I don't think it's as simple as that. I think it's a decision made by individuals that
Hmm.
need to kind of snowball into entire communities and entire people groups to, yeah, really affect change. And I think it starts with us. Like because of we're the ones having this conversation, I think we should choose to support them first, even if it's like what we perceive as first. Even if
Yeah.
we're thinking that, oh, they haven't supported us, why do we support them? I don't think that's the question that we need to be asking. I think the question that we need to ask is, how can we make life better for all people here in America?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think yeah, it's as simple as we just gotta love first, and especially as Christians. I mean,
Hmm.
you and I are Christians. I'm not assuming all the listeners are, but one of the biggest commandments that we receive from Jesus is to love your neighbors as yourself.
Hmm.
And I would really love it if everyone, supported Asian Americans and uh, didn't discriminate against us. So that means that I need to love everyone else and not discriminate against anyone else, right?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that really, I think it's not an easy thing to enact, especially if you are in a place of, well, why do I have to do it first? But I think that is the answer. I think that
Hmm.
is the way that we make things better for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because if you want that change, then you have to be the change first. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I want to ask, I want to bring up another thing.
Mhm.
Now that we've talked about kind of Christianity, a big figure in Christianity, Pastor Louis Giglio, in at Passion. Junie actually sent me this, but
Mhm.
he posted about Ahmaud Arbery, but he kind of did
Mhm.
it in a very vague way of kind of just, oh, like seek justice. I think he just posted a Bible verse along with like a graphic of like run with
Yeah.
Maud. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there was a comment by someone saying, like, what what do we do about this? Like, what are you actually
Mhm.
saying? Justice toward what? Like, what are some calls to actions to actually
Right.
like figure this out? So, do you feel like the Christian community's response to this has been lacking, especially from like white churches or maybe even Asian American churches?
Yeah. Um, it's just so, there's so many different layers to it. I mean, like, I think when it comes to the predominantly white churches, which are the majority of like the mega churches here in Atlanta, right? Um, like it's taken me my whole college career and after up to now. So like, what is that? 4, 5, 6, 7 years, to be able to come to a point where like I'm even just fumbling through talking about race and racism and these systems of oppression. But like it really has to start with the person themselves first. And there was this one documentary that I watched on like one workshop that I was doing, and the way that they described the definition of racism um, made me feel really uncomfortable. But also, I was like, that is so crazy because it's 100% true. But it was that basically, um, minority people of color, cannot actually be racist because we are the ones that are the oppressed group. The people that are racist are white people, whether they are overtly racist or not. Like, just because of the way that the system is set up, like they are racist, because they are benefiting from this whole system and this whole belief that white people are better. And I think when it comes to all of these white churches, um, there's so many things that are uncomfortable because that requires you to dismantle your whole entire belief system, first off, about yourself. And and then also marrying that with with our belief in like the kingdom, right? But the kingdom of God is for all people, and to completely what's the word I'm looking for? Just like to completely push out the idea that like, oh no, it doesn't matter what race you are, like it doesn't matter what background you come from. Like that is completely missing the whole point that it's for all people. Because it's really through all of our differences and how God created us in our unique stories in the skin that we're in, right? I think like that has to be a part of the story too. And I'm not gonna speak for Passion or like for all white churches, but that's just my personal opinion. I think there are a lot of churches that are moving in the right direction, but then there's a lot that aren't even looking at the issue, and they have a whole board of elders and leaders that are all white, and then it's just like, okay, so what does that mean? So that's one layer, right? And then when it comes to the Asian American church, or I don't even know if like an Asian American church exists, because a lot of the times it's usually like our parents' generation that came, and like then there's usually an attachment of an English ministry or something. Like the only Asian American church that I can think of is like 4 Points, but I don't really know anything about their ministry. But when you think about um, I guess the value of the Asian American church, a lot of that has to do with yes, it has to do with our faith and everything, but I feel like a lot more of that has to do with like our community. And so opening up this whole other layer of like, oh, it's not just us, um I think that that's a whole other conversation to be had, because a lot of the times, like that is our quote unquote place of sanctuary from having to put up these walls of like of getting through the day, and like in this very white world that we live in. Or I don't know if that makes sense, if I'm wording it correctly. um,
No, because you're
but
basically talking about like in the Asian American church, it's almost as if there are better things to talk about, right? Like we don't want to muddy our place of safe haven with talks of things that are kind of outside, almost like quote unquote outside of our concerns, right? Because like we need to take care of ourselves first. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
uh, more or less, yeah.
Hmm.
That's yeah, because I feel like that's the reason why I like for my personal journey, of these past few years in my faith and really trying to find a church to attend. um I grew up going to KCPC, and then once I graduated college, I was just like, okay, I want to be in a church that is more multicultural, like yada yada yada, right? But every time I went to one of like these churches, and most of the time they were like mega churches, um, I couldn't help but feel like a longing for my Asian American community, because I that's when you can just like be actually yourself,
Hmm.
you know like at school, I felt like I always had to present myself in a certain way, or I always had to be ready to defend myself. At work, same thing. Even just like going to public places, same thing, because I'm seen as an Asian female. And so the only place that I could actually feel like comfortable just being myself, not having to worry about that, is at an Asian American church.
Hmm.
And so, um, yeah, I guess, I mean, yeah, I'm just rambling on now, but basically what you said,
Yeah. Yeah.
that like that's your place of sanctuary, that's your safe haven. And usually those conversations aren't things that are first brought up.
Hmm.
um, but again, like you have to ask why not. um yeah.
Because yeah, that's actually exactly my next question. Why not, right? Like, what can we be doing different as a Asian American? Well, I'm gonna say Korean church because that's what I know. As a Korean church, because I'm a part of the English ministry of a Korean church. As the English ministry of a Korean church with mostly second generation Korean Americans or Asian Americans, what can we be doing to encourage these types of conversations? Because it seems like it's a siloed event, right? It's happening to a people group that is not our own, right? It's happening to the Black community. It's not happening to us, so it's not like first priority. But I would argue that any oppression anywhere is a risk, and what's the word I'm looking for? Is an it's a I'll just say risk. It's a risk to anyone else, right? And any other
Hmm.
minority group, right? Because if there's oppression that exists toward a particular minority group, that means there's a chance that it can be oppression. It can lead to oppression toward a different minority group, right? So it definitely
Hmm.
is something that we need to be concerned about. I think personally,
Yeah.
as Asian Americans. But I mean, do you have any thoughts on what we can be doing to encourage our peers to have more of these conversations and be comfortable having these conversations?
Yeah. um it just makes me think about like in the hierarchy of Korean churches, right? Like the most of the leaders are very or not very uh, most of the leaders are immigrant parents, right?
Right.
And so they
First
have a
generation.
certain set of, yes, first generation, thank you.
Hmm.
They have a certain set of values and things that they feel are important, for the church community. um, but it really conflicts, I guess, sometimes with our Americanness,
Mm,
and also in just being present in what's actually going on in America right now.
mm,
Um, and so I think it's it's difficult because it's like our parents' generation, our first generation, um, they I mean, we should focus on like, helping to educate them and all that stuff, and helping them to realize like this is what's going on and whatever, and like, but I don't know if you've ever had like conversations with your parents about like race and these kinds of conversations, but it's very difficult.
yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, my mom was kind of saying something very stereotypical of Black people,
Mm,
and I just was like, I was at the dinner table with her, and I was like, what you're saying right now is really racist, right? And she's like, no, 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 like that's not what I'm saying, like you just don't get it, like da, da, da," and just going on about that. And I was like, no, the fact that you think that of this single individual, is being racist. And anyways, that's a whole story in itself. But like, anyways, what I'm trying to say is that like, to change their minds and to change their values and everything, like they should, yes, they should, everybody should always be working on themselves, but I think what we should be focusing on is really our voice as second generation,
mm,
as the children of immigrants,
yeah.
because I feel like the voice that we have, or the potential for what we have, um, for the future generations to come, after us, we hold so much power because our space is so unique.
Mm,
Because what we, how we choose to integrate our Asian and Americanness, I feel like is what will really pave the path for us to be more of a presence in responding
mm.
to these different issues. Um, yeah, I don't know if I just went off tangent.
No, no, that's very relevant. It's funny you say that it's awkward to talk to your parents about race issues because the first race related conversation I had with my parents was actually before we moved to America. So I was like kindergarten. I was a kindergartner, and I remember is my parents are basically saying, "Hey, when we go to America," so we actually moved to LA first. Straight from Korea, we went to
Mhm.
LA, and this was just a few years after the LA riots. So my parents said, "You got to be careful of black people because they don't like us." And it was because the Korean people and black people
Mhm.
were literally killing each other in the streets, right?
Right.
So they were in their minds, from their perspective, literally teaching me and my brother survival skills. Like these type of people you have to avoid or you have to be careful of because they don't
Mhm.
like you and they might want to kill you. And I think it is difficult for our parents, our first generation Asian Americans, especially Korean Americans, I think, because like I was talking about, there's such a long history there, and their first
Yeah.
impression of Black Americans was the LA riots, right? Even if
Right.
like they didn't move to LA, if you were living in Korea at the time that that happened, it was big news. Koreans are saying
Mhm. Yeah.
like the Korean community is being attacked in America. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really complicated there. But I think the immediate thing that we can do as second generation Asian Americans is to work on our voice, is to really figure
Yeah.
out, how we can speak up for these injustices and oppressions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like our parents, like it's not anything to like point fingers towards them, because like really we're operating within like a survivalist mentality, right?
Hmm.
But I think that the I don't think the word is like being passive, in these conversations, but just like not talking about these things, like I think has trickled down to our generation
Mm,
because we don't see the importance of it per se. Um, and so for us to, but then because of the rise of like social media and things, right? Like I think that's where we have kind of gained more information.
mhm,
And so I think now it's kind of like trying to understand, like, how do I take in all of this, and like what does that mean to me, and what does this mean about me, right? um, because we never had those important conversations with our parents.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we are all really trying to figure out what our voice is and how we should be, wielding our voices pretty much
Hmm.
in these
Yeah.
situations. Um, any other thoughts about the topic? Anything that we didn't get to talk about?
I just, for anybody that is listening, that is Asian American, I think everybody is on their own journey in understanding the power and the strength of your identity, and like all the things that make you you. Um, and personally, for me, it took me such a long time to realize that I actually had a place at the table, um, and I actually had a voice that was worth being heard. um, and I'm so thankful that like through my experience as an educator, like I have been able to do so much work within myself to get to a point and to have experiences of talking to people of different backgrounds. And like when I finally decided to speak up, it changed things tremendously for myself and for other people.
Mm,
um, because so many of the times their responses would just be like, I had no idea that you were going through that, or like that, like that's what it was like for you growing up.
mm,
um, and I always like preface it by saying, like, this is only my experience, because like I don't want to generalize for everybody. but
yeah,
um but it shifts things, and I think once we recognize the power of our own voice and really hone in onto that, um, it's it's only all for the better. Like, of course, we're gonna mess up, we're gonna fumble through it, like how I did this whole entire podcast. um, but it's important nonetheless, because you're growing and you're progressing towards something greater. So yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think really what we've kind of come to the conclusion of on this podcast is the need for more dialogue, the need for
Hmm.
more vocalization of our thoughts and opinions, and yeah, choosing to support other minorities, even if we don't, see that same support or perceive the same support. So, yeah, I think as Asian Americans, I'm assuming most of my listeners are Asian Americans. I think what we should be doing is, um, yeah, be more vocal about our thoughts. When we see injustices happening, I think our response should be bold and loud. I don't think it should be soft and whimpered. I don't think it should just be like, oh yeah, I agree with that, and that's it. I think we should try to be vocal, just like Jess did with wanting to have this conversation, which I really appreciate, by the way.
But
Um,
it's interesting because, like, even in our own ways, like, I feel like the way that I approached you is also very Asian.
yeah, yeah,
Because I was like, the first things that I said was like, hey, I usually don't like do this, and right, just like really beating around the bush.
yeah,
Um, and I completely agree. Like, just you should put yourself out there, and maybe being bold looks different for you though,
mm,
but nonetheless, like put yourself out there.
yes.
um yeah.
Oh, and just a disclaimer. I know we talked about Pastor Louis. I personally really like Pastor Louis Giglio. I don't think he did anything wrong per se. I'm for sure know that he's not a racist or anything like that. So I'm just hoping that no one got that impression. I just think that there was an opportunity for him to be, loud and more vocal about the situation. But that didn't happen. But that is to say, I still love the guy. He's great. I mean, Passion City Church has blessed me a ton, especially these days
Yeah.
because I'm getting to see their live streams. Because um,
Yeah.
I watch like 3 services on Sunday now because I'm like everything's online now, so you get to see all your friends' churches and all that. Um, but yeah, I
Yeah.
just needed to
No,
throw that in there.
yeah. No church is perfect
Hmm.
and no person is perfect. And the only thing that we can do is just to be open-minded, and yeah, and really take those opportunities and those questions, because it's when you decide to ignore those things and just remain silent that's really doing more harm than good.
For sure, for sure. So in spirit of that, guys, if there's anyone else out there who wants to have this kind of conversation on the podcast or not, please feel free to reach out at IHTHT podcast at gmail.com. That's I hope they hear this abbreviated podcast at gmail.com, or on Instagram at I hope they hear this. That's actually where Jess reached out to say she wanted to talk about this, or on Twitter at IHTHT podcast. And so, yeah, if you have any thoughts, if you have any feedback, if any of this resonated with you, if you have any questions for me or Jess, please feel free to reach out via those medium, and we would love to continue having this dialogue because for sure this dialogue is far from being over. I think we need to keep having these conversations. I think we need to keep, yeah, trying to raise our voices in support of other minorities when we see atrocious murders like what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Jess, thank you so much for being on. This was very fruitful conversation.
I
Um,
hope so. And yeah, I apologize if nothing, or if I said anything that didn't make any sense, or again, I'm not an expert. I'm not a professor of race theory or anything, so I'm just a person trying to figure it out too.
I thought it was great. I thought you were very coherent. You're being harder on yourself than you
Okay.
need to be. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.